In the region of San Luis Potosí, Mexico, there exists an ecclesiastical archive sealed since 1678. Inside it are 844 death certificates, all signed by a single man, Father Joaquin Vázquez. Every certificate lists the same cause of death: spiritual purification. When archaeologists discovered a mass grave with hundreds of indigenous skeletons near an old mission site in 1967, the church quickly bought the land and forbade any further excavations. What no one knew was that the personal diaries of the papal envoy who once investigated Father Vázquez had been recovered. And what they reveal is a horror the church has hidden for more than 3 centuries. Tonight, for the first time, you will hear the true story of the family that traded in souls. Before continuing with the story of the Vázquez family, I want to ask you, from which country or city are you listening to us? Leave it in the comments and subscribe to the channel. Remember, this type of content isn't for everyone, only for those brave enough to face the dark truths of history. If you're one of them, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our exclusive stories. Now, let's enter this macabre story that few would dare to tell. New Spain, 1634. In the province of San Luis Potosí, between arid plateaus and fast rivers, stretched a land rich in silver but starving for labor. The Spanish crown and the church had established a system of missions to Christianize the native peoples. Chicamicas, Huastecos, and Pams, proud tribes that resisted foreign domination. In this landscape of greed and distorted faith stood the mission of Santa María de Los Angeles, a simple gray stone structure with a single tower that pierced the sky like a dagger. Unlike other colonial churches, this one lacked ornate decorations. Its thick walls and narrow windows made it look more like a fortress than a place of prayer. Locals called it the Silent One because songs or prayers were rarely heard from within, only the uneasy tolling of its bells at irregular hours. The Vázquez family had arrived in New Spain in 1630 when Don Rodrigo Vázquez, a merchant from Seville with powerful court connections, obtained a royal encomienda. He brought his 3 sons. Joaquin, the eldest, who from a young age had shown a strong inclination toward the priesthood. Antonio, cold and methodical. And Francisco, the youngest, known for his violent temper and his talent for intimidating others. Father Joaquin Vázquez was not the typical priest of his time. Tall, broad-shouldered, and sharp-eyed, he inspired fear rather than devotion. His sermons constantly spoke of eternal fire and the need to purify savage souls. At just 32, he already directed the mission of Santa Maria, an unusual privilege for someone so young. Rumor had it that letters from influential clergy in Spain had helped secure his position. His brothers soon established businesses in the region. Antonio became a scribe and handler of official documents, while Francisco organized caravans between the mission and distant estates and mines. Outwardly, they appear to be a family devoted to evangelization and legitimate trade. But the truth was far darker. The Spanish settlers respected the Vázquez family, or at least feared them enough to keep appearances. The indigenous people, however, had begun whispering another name for the mission: Mictlan Teocalli, the Temple of Death. But they never dared say it aloud before the Spaniards. At that time, the town of San Luis Potosí was a hive of mining and trade activity. The reddish dirt roads were crowded with wagons, merchants, soldiers, and enslaved laborers working from sunrise until the mountains swallowed the sun. At night, a tense silence covered the region, interrupted only by the distant howl of coyotes or a drunkard's scream. While most missions held public baptisms and festive ceremonies to celebrate conversions, Santa Maria operated with unsettling secrecy. The natives entered, but few ever came out, and those who did seemed changed, heads lowered, obedient, eyes hollow. Truly converted, Father Joaquin would say, with a smile that never reached his eyes. That night of June 12th, 1634, when the new moon left the sky in total darkness, the first miracle of mass conversion occurred, an event that would elevate Father Joaquin's prestige. That night, Francisco Vázquez and 6 armed men surrounded a small Huasteco settlement 8 leagues from the mission. Families slept in their adobe and straw huts when the torches and shouting woke them. In the name of God and the King, everyone to the center of the village. Francisco thundered as his men dragged the natives from their homes. Children cried, mothers clutched their babies, elders stumbled in the dark. In total, 47 souls were gathered under the threat of muskets and swords. Among them was Maria Yoleth, a 16-year-old girl who had learned some Spanish from a Franciscan friar who occasionally visited her village. She would later recall that night with painful precision. The tall man said we were pagans, that we worshiped demons. But we already knew his God. The good friar had spoken to us about him. When my father, the village chief, tried to explain this, the man struck him with the butt of his weapon. I saw blood spill from his mouth as he fell to his knees. Savages do not speak, the man said. Savages listen and obey, bound with ropes and chained in groups. The Huastecos were forced to march toward the mission through the night. 2 elders who couldn't keep pace were abandoned along the way. A crying baby was taken from his mother's arms and given to a Spanish family in a nearby town, an act of Christian charity. By dawn, the exhausted captives reached Santa María de Los Angeles. Father Joaquin awaited them at the gates, dressed in a plain black cassock, holding a silver crucifix. His eyes scanned the group like a merchant appraising cattle. "Welcome to the house of God," he said calmly. "Here we will purify your souls and free you from the slavery of sin." What followed marked the beginning of a process that the Vázquez family would perfect over the years. The men were separated from the women. The children were torn from their mother's arms. Each person received a number and was marked with a small cross-shaped cut on a right forearm. For 3 days, they were given no food, forced to kneel on the hard stone floor, while Father Joaquin preached to them endlessly in Spanish, a language most did not understand, about hell, demons, and eternal damnation. On the 4th day, the purification began. One by one, they were taken down to the crypt beneath the church. What happened there remained a secret, but the screams could be heard through the thick stone walls. When they came back up, many bore burn marks, cuts, and bruises. All of them shared the same empty gaze. On June 20th, Father Joaquin proudly announced that he had achieved the conversion of 40 Huasteco natives in record time. 3 had died during the process, due to the intensity of their faith and the rigor of purification, according to the official reports sent to the bishopric. What impressed the colonial authorities most was how these new converts displayed absolute obedience and a total willingness to work. A week later, Antonio Vázquez presented documents certifying that these natives had voluntarily offered to serve on the haciendas to complete their Christian education. Every paper bore a thumbprint as a signature, all validated by the official seal of the royal notary. The 40 newly converted Huastecos were then divided into groups and sold to different landowners and mine operators. The money, recorded as donations to the mission, began to fill the coffers of the Vázquez family. In town, some Spaniards whispered about Father Joaquin's unorthodox methods, but the results were undeniable: docile, hard-working natives who appeared sincerely Christianized. For the landowners desperate for labor, the system was perfect. For the natives, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would last for decades. Thus, with that first group began the terrible enterprise that would make the Vázquez family the most feared and secretly the richest men in the province. As the years passed, Father Joaquin Vázquez's reputation grew among the colonial authorities. His intensive conversion method produced results that other missionaries could only envy. Between 1634 and 1640, more than 500 natives passed through the mission of Santa María de Los Angeles. Official records showed successful conversions and placements in various haciendas to complete their Christian education. The reality, however, was something far more sinister, a system of slavery disguised as evangelization. During those years, the mission changed subtly. New underground cells were built, euphemistically called chambers of meditation. The walls grew taller. Armed guards watched day and night, supposedly to protect the converts from pagan temptations. Father Joaquin no longer held public masses. He delegated that duty to a young assistant priest, dedicating himself exclusively to what he called his special methods of conversion. Among the indigenous communities, even mentioning Santa Maria provoked terror. Mothers warned their children to hide at the sight of Spanish riders. Some tribes abandoned their ancestral villages, fleeing deep into the mountains, preferring hunger and hardship over the salvation of Father Vázquez. Then, in 1641, an incident added yet another shadow to the mission's growing infamy. Catalina Hernandez, the wife of a Spanish merchant, was walking past the church one afternoon when she heard a strange chant coming from inside. It wasn't Latin, nor any known religious hymn. It was older, primal, in a language she couldn't recognize. Curious, she approached one of the narrow windows and peered inside. What she saw froze her blood. Father Joaquin stood before the altar, but not in his usual cassock. He wore an elaborate garment blending priestly robes with indigenous ornaments. Before him knelt a group of natives. On the altar, there was no crucifix, only what looked like an ancient codex. The air was heavy with the smoke of burning herbs. Catalina, the devout Catholic, was horrified. That very night, she told her husband what she had seen. Cautious and pragmatic, he urged her to stay silent. The Vázquez family has ears everywhere, he warned. But Catalina couldn't keep it to herself. She confided in her confessor, Father Miguel Ruiz, from the main parish. 3 days later, Catalina's husband returned home from the market to find their house ransacked and his wife gone. Francisco Vázquez personally arrived to offer his help in the search, suggesting perhaps Catalina had run away with a lover or been taken by rebel Indians. A week later, her body appeared floating in the river, declared accidental drowning. Father Miguel Ruiz quietly began investigating the Vázquez family. He noted irregularities in the records of baptisms and burials, too many deaths during the so-called conversion process. He observed how Francisco's caravans arrived at the mission full of natives and left with far fewer, while Antonio prepared voluntary servitude documents with official seals and signatures that seemed too uniform. Then, in April of 1642, Father Ruiz disappeared. His room in the parish was found empty, showing signs of a struggle. When the bishop's office sent a letter asking about his whereabouts, Antonio Vázquez replied with an official document stating that Father Ruiz had requested a transfer to a remote northern mission. The signature was clearly forged, but no one dare question it. Among the native communities, stories began to spread about what happened to those who disappeared inside Santa Maria. Whispers spoke of tortures designed not just to break the body, but the spirit, of rituals where Father Joaquin mixed Christian prayers with ancient pagan practices to create something new, a form of mental control. Rumor also told of a secret book where Joaquin recorded the techniques he used to destroy a person's will. The most disturbing tales claimed that not all of the natives were ever sent to the haciendas. Some, the ones who resisted conversion or those who possessed knowledge of traditional medicine, were kept in the catacombs beneath the church. There, it was said, Father Joaquin experimented with increasingly extreme methods of conversion, striving to perfect a system capable of breaking even the strongest souls. Meanwhile, the Vázquez Empire expanded. Antonio was appointed chief notary of the province. Francisco received his own royal land grant. Generous donations flowed steadily from the mission to the bishopric and the colonial authorities. No one questioned the source of such wealth. By 1645, the mission of Santa María de los Ángeles was officially admired and secretly feared. Spanish officials praised its effective methods. Landowners valued its obedient converts. But the indigenous people knew it as the gateway to hell. And at the center of it all stood Father Joaquin Vázquez, perfecting his macabre art, the art of trading broken souls. In the spring of 1656, 22 years after the Vázquez family began their operations, a man arrived in San Luis Potosí who would change the course of this dark story forever. His name was Diego Martínez de Villanueva, a young physician educated at the University of Salamanca, sent by the viceroy to address a fever epidemic spreading through the region. Martínez was a man of science in an era ruled by superstition. At just 30 years old, he had studied the latest medical advances in Europe and questioned many of the church's long-standing practices. His arrival did not please the Vázquez brothers, especially when he began visiting the haciendas to treat sick workers, including the converted natives from Santa María. During these visits, Martínez noticed something deeply disturbing. Many of Father Joaquin's converts exhibited the same unusual symptoms, which matched no known illness. They had vacant eyes, mechanical movements, and displayed absolute obedience, even when gravely injured or ill. And all of them bore the same small scar, a cross on their right forearm. More unsettling still, these symptoms worsened whenever the natives heard certain sounds, particularly the ringing of bells, like those of Santa Maria. Some fell into trance-like states, trembling uncontrollably. A few began reciting Latin phrases, even though they didn't speak the language. Intrigued and alarmed, Martínez began documenting his observations in a secret diary. He interviewed Spanish overseers who worked on the haciendas, and they too told him about the strange behavior of the Vázquez converts. "They don't sleep, doctor," one overseer confided. "We watch them day and night. They work until they collapse, and still, sometimes we find them kneeling in their quarters, whispering prayers at midnight. And when they die, doctor, they die smiling. It's the most disturbing thing I've ever seen." Martínez also discovered that many of these natives died young, usually 2 to 5 years after their conversion. The official causes of death were listed as fevers or accidents, but the symptoms that preceded their deaths told a different story. Neurological deterioration, episodes of severe disorientation, and finally, complete collapse of vital functions. His medical curiosity soon turned into horror when he was called to treat a dying young native woman named Lali, who had passed through Santa Maria 3 years earlier. Her body was covered not only with a cross-shaped scar on her arm, but also faint scars on her scalp and behind her ears. Before dying, in a brief moment of lucidity, the girl grabbed the doctor's hand and whispered in broken Spanish, "The bells, when they ring, he enters my head. His words are like knives. They cut us apart inside, and then rebuild us. But we're not the same. Parts of us stay in his books and in his instruments." Martínez knew he had to see inside Santa Maria, but the mission was heavily guarded. His opportunity came unexpectedly when Antonio Vázquez, now in his 50s, suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. The doctor was summoned to treat him. Upon entering Antonio's residence, which was connected to the mission itself, Martinez found himself in the very heart of the Vázquez Empire. While tending to the patient, he couldn't help noticing the surroundings. Fine furniture imported from Spain, valuable paintings, silver ornaments. Far too much luxury for a mere provincial notary. More revealing still was an accounting ledger, left partially open on a desk. A quick glance revealed columns of names and numbers, labeled as pieces delivered and defective specimens. The language was deliberately cryptic, but Martinez understood perfectly. He was looking at the records of a human trade. As he prepared medicine, he overheard voices coming from the next room. Francisco Vázquez arguing heatedly with Father Joaquin. "The method is failing, brother," Francisco said. "The last batches barely last 3 years on the estates. The buyers are complaining. They're not following the instructions," Joaquin replied coldly. "I told them they must be exposed to the bell sounds regularly and repeat the key phrases. The conditioning fades if it isn't reinforced." "We can't go on like this," Francisco hissed. "Rumors are spreading. That meddling doctor asks too many questions." "The doctor won't be a problem for long," Joaquin answered calmly. "As for the methods, I've perfected a new technique on the latest subjects combining fasting, specific herbs, and the ancient texts we found in that pyramid. The results are promising." Frozen by what he'd heard, Martinez finished his treatment quickly and prepared to leave, but not before catching sight of something terrifying. Through a half-open door, he saw what looked like a small laboratory. Glass jars of herbs, surgical tools, and, most horrifying of all, several human skulls with strange holes and carvings. That night, Martinez wrote feverishly in his diary, recording everything he had seen and heard. His conclusion was chilling. The Vázquez family wasn't merely enslaving natives. They were experimenting with the human mind by blending torture, hallucinogenic plants, and possibly ancient pre-Hispanic knowledge. Father Joaquin had created a perverse science of mental control, all under the holy guise of religious conversion. Determined to expose the truth, Martinez sent a detailed letter to the viceroy. 2 weeks later, he received a formal response. He was to focus on the epidemic and refrain from defaming respected servants of the crown and the church without solid proof. It was then that Martinez realized the full reach of the Vázquez influence. Their power extended all the way to the capital of the viceroyalty. He would need irrefutable evidence to bring them down. What he didn't know was that Father Joaquin Vázquez had already set his sights on him and possessed an almost supernatural instinct for detecting threats to his empire of broken souls. By the autumn of 1656, Diego Martinez had spent months collecting evidence against the Vázquez brothers. He interviewed hacienda workers, native families who had lost loved ones, even Spaniards who had seen irregularities but were too afraid to speak. He hid his coded notes, written in Latin medical terminology, beneath the floorboards of his modest home. Every night, he added new details, dates of conversions, names of the disappeared, and patterns in the premature deaths of the converts. Then, one day, he found his most important witness, a former servant from the mission named Lucas, who had escaped after witnessing something that still haunted him. Trembling, constantly looking over his shoulder, Lucas told him, "There's a secret room behind the altar, doctor. That's where the Father takes the most rebellious ones. He has instruments, things that don't belong in a church, and a book, old, with strange symbols, half Christian, half from the ancients." Lucas hesitated, trembling harder. "He opens their heads while they're still alive, Singer. He said he needed to reach their souls directly. Then he puts in herbs, powders, liquids. Some die screaming, others change. They become like puppets, obeying every word. Martinez documented the testimony carefully, though he could barely believe that such barbarity could happen under the authority of church. Yet the symptoms he had seen among the converts matched exactly what Lucas described: signs of traumatic brain intervention. Meanwhile, the Vázquez Empire continued to expand. With Antonio now partially incapacitated, Francisco assumed more control of the business. He was less methodical than his brothers, but far more ambitious. And under his impulsive leadership, the operations accelerated. More night raids, more captured natives, less time devoted to the conversion process. That haste, however, led to a critical mistake. In October of 1656, one of Francisco's caravans was ambushed by Chichimeca warriors while transporting a group of newly processed converts. In the chaos, 5 natives managed to escape. Among them, a young man named Tysock, who had pretended to submit during his time at the mission while secretly keeping his mind intact. Tysock had seen everything. He had witnessed the physical tortures designed to break their resistance, the potions and drugs that induced hallucinations and confusion, and the rituals where Father Joaquin mixed Catholic prayers with ancient chants as he applied his treatments. Most importantly, he had seen the book Lucas spoke of, a hybrid codex combining Spanish texts with pre-Hispanic hieroglyphs. When he reached Martinez, Tysock gave him the most detailed testimony the doctor had yet obtained about the inner workings of Santa Maria. First, they break your body with hunger, exhaustion, and pain, Tysock explained. Then they break your mind with fear and confusion. They make you see things, hear voices. The drugs, they make you weak. Finally, they break your spirit. They convince you your soul belongs to them, that only by obeying can you save it. Martinez asked, and the surgical operations, were they for? For the special cases, said Tysock. Those who resist, or those they use to test new methods. The Father says the soul hides in certain places of the skull, and he can reach it directly. Some survive and become perfectly obedient. Others end up in the secret cemetery. Secret cemetery? Martinez echoed. Behind the mission, beneath an olive grove, Tysock answered. That's where they bury the failures, hundreds of them, with no names, only numbers. The same numbers written in his black book. That was the final piece Martinez needed. A clandestine graveyard with hundreds of bodies would be the irrefutable proof. But to find it, he would have to enter Vázquez territory himself, risking his life. The opportunity, or the trap, came at the end of November. Francisco Vázquez, pretending ignorance of the doctor's investigation, summoned him urgently to the mission. Antonio, he claimed, had suffered another attack and needed immediate attention. Martinez suspected an ambush, yet also saw the perfect chance to obtain direct evidence. He left his documents with a trusted friend with instructions. If he didn't return within 3 days, they were to be sent to the University of Salamanca. Then he went. Upon arriving at Santa Maria, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. The church was unusually silent. No murmurs of forced prayers, no cries from the crypts. Francisco received him personally, wearing a polite but strained smile. Dr. Martinez, thank you for coming so quickly. My brother's in his room. Please follow me. As they walked through the dim corridors, Martinez noticed dark stains on the stone floor, stains that looked suspiciously like poorly cleaned blood. The air smelled of burned herbs, acrid and suffocating. And worst of all was the silence, heavy and unnatural. According to his sources, There should have been at least 20 converts in process. Where are the new converts? He asked casually. Father Joaquin has implemented a new phase that requires total silence and isolation, Francisco replied without meeting his eyes. They are in deep meditation. When they reached Antonio's chamber, Martinez found the man lying in bed, weak but far from dying. His condition was nowhere near as critical as Francisco's words had implied. The doctor examined him under Francisco's cold stare. "What do you think, doctor?" "Not as bad as I feared," Martinez replied. "A light bleeding and this herbal tonic should stabilize him. I'll need to prepare the mixture. Do you have a mortar and fresh herbs in the kitchen?" "Of course," said Francisco. "I'll show you the way." As they crossed unfamiliar corridors, Martinez memorized every turn, searching for hidden passages that might lead to the crypts or the olive grove. When they passed a heavy wooden door, he heard a faint moan from behind it. "What's in there?" he asked, stopping. "Storage rooms," Francisco replied curtly. "Some of our supplies spoil in the humidity." In the kitchen, while preparing the remedy, Martinez noticed a narrow passage leading to the back of the mission. If Tysok's words were true, the secret cemetery lay in that direction, beneath the olive trees. "I'll need fresh water for the tonic," Martinez said. "There's a well down that corridor, but I'll send someone to fetch it," Francisco replied. "No need to trouble anyone," said Martinez calmly. "I'll be right back." Before Francisco could stop him, Martinez walked quickly down the corridor and out into the open air. He found himself in a small orchard, and beyond it, just as Tysok had described, stretched an olive grove. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the uneven ground. Martinez's heartbeat quickened as he knelt to examine the soil beneath the trees. He noticed small, regular depressions, as if the ground had sunk in dozens of spots. And then something else, a faint, unmistakable scent, one that only a trained physician could recognize. The sweet, clinging odor of decomposition. He was so absorbed in his discovery that he didn't hear the footsteps behind him. Not until it was too late. "It seems our good doctor has found something more interesting than water," said the calm, almost pleasant voice of Father Joaquin Vázquez. Martinez turned sharply and found himself face to face with the priest. Though now in his 50s, Joaquin still carried an imposing presence. But his eyes had changed since the last time Martinez saw him. They were sunken, feverish, glowing with the sleepless obsession of a man who had looked too long into darkness. "Father Vázquez," Martinez said, struggling to maintain his composure. "I was only looking for water, for your brother's remedy." Joaquin smiled, a smile that never reached his eyes. "Your dedication as a physician is admirable, doctor, though your skill at lying leaves much to be desired." From behind the priest, Francisco appeared, flanked by 2 armed guards. "We should finish this quickly," Francisco urged. "The Viceroy's messenger arrives tomorrow." "Messenger?" Martinez asked, a spark of hope cutting through his fear. "Yes," Joaquin answered smoothly. "Apparently, someone has been sending rather alarming letters to the authorities, letters filled with accusations against our mission. The Viceroy is sending an investigator." He stepped closer. "Fortunately, when he arrives, he will find only a poor doctor who, driven mad by tropical fevers, attacked Antonio Vázquez and then, consumed by guilt, took his own life." "That will never work," Martinez said, stepping back. "I left my documents with someone I trust. If I don't return—" "Ah, yes," interrupted Joaquin, enjoying the flicker of panic in the doctor's eyes. "Your friend, the merchant Jimenez. I'm afraid he suffered an unfortunate accident this morning. A fall from his balcony. Very tragic. And even more tragic, his house caught fire soon after. Nothing could be saved." Martinez felt the world collapse around him. All his work, all his proof, Everything gone. And now he was trapped. You call this your mission? Martinez spat bitterly. You torture and enslave innocents in the name of God. I am saving them, Joaquin replied, his voice rising with fanatical fervor. These savage souls are doomed unless they are purified. My methods may seem severe, but they are necessary. I have discovered truths the official church is too weak to embrace. The road to salvation sometimes requires sacrifice. As he spoke, the sun slipped below the horizon, and the olive grove was swallowed by darkness. From within the church, the bells began to ring, announcing the hour of vespers. "Ah, listen," Joaquin said, raising a finger. "The bells. Did you know, Doctor, that certain sound patterns, combined with the right words, can open the human mind like a flower? It's fascinating. I had intended to document all my findings one day, but I suppose some knowledge is too powerful to be shared." "You're a monster," Martinez whispered. "I'm a visionary," Joaquin corrected. "And you, Doctor, are about to become my most fascinating subject, an educated man, a scientist. I wonder how your trained mind will respond to my methods. It will be a fascinating study." At his signal, the guards moved in. Martinez tried to run, but they were faster. He was seized, dragged violently toward the mission. As they hauled him away, his eyes caught one last glimpse of the olive grove, where hundreds of lost souls rested in nameless graves, silent witnesses to the horrors of Santa Maria de Los Angeles. The great doors of the mission closed behind him with a thunderous echo, and Diego Martinez de Villanueva became the next chapter in the dark history of the merchants of souls. On December 7th, 1656, 3 weeks after the disappearance of Dr. Diego Martinez, the Viceroy's envoy finally arrived in San Luis Potosí. He was Father Alonso de Castilla, a 60-year-old Dominican friar known for his sharp intellect and unyielding sense of justice. Unlike other inspectors who were easily swayed by banquets, bribes, and polite flattery, Alonso was austere and incorruptible, a man who had spent his life fighting abuse within the church itself. The Vázquez brothers, aware of the scrutiny, prepared for his arrival meticulously. The mission was cleaned from top to bottom. The converts, undergoing their process, were moved to a distant warehouse, and the records were carefully altered to show nothing but routine baptisms and natural deaths. A complete story had been fabricated about the tragic doctor, how he had attacked Antonio Vázquez in a fit of fever-driven madness and then hanged himself in guilt. When Father Alonso arrived, Joaquin Vázquez received him personally at the gates of Santa Maria de Los Angeles, his expression the very image of a humble, devout missionary. "It is an honor to receive so distinguished a representative of His Excellency," Joaquin said with studied reverence. "Our mission is open to your inspection. We have nothing to hide." Alonso's seasoned eyes that had seen too much hypocrisy over the decades, met his. "That, Father Vázquez," he replied coldly, "is what I intend to determine myself. The accusations that have reached the Viceroy are extremely serious," he continued. "Calumnies, Father Alonso," Joaquin interrupted smoothly. "The work of jealous men who envy the success of our evangelization." "We shall see," the Dominican answered simply. For the next 3 days, Alonso conducted a meticulous inspection. He examined the mission's ledgers, questioned local officials, and visited several haciendas where the so-called converts worked. Everything appeared in perfect order, yet the Dominican couldn't ignore certain disturbing details. The vacant stares of the natives, minor inconsistencies in the death records, and above all, a palpable tension that seemed to hang over everyone he spoke to. What the Vázquez brothers didn't know was that Alonso hadn't come only because of the letters from Martinez. Months earlier, a Huasteco man named Apai had reached Mexico City after an almost impossible journey of more than 400 leagues. Tortured, disfigured, and barely alive, he carried a small bundle, a strip of human skin tattooed with names and dates. It had been cut from his dead brother's arm, one of Father Joaquin's converts. This horrific evidence, combined with the doctor's letters, had convinced the viceroy to send Alonso. And not alone. A small contingent of soldiers followed, discreetly housed in the town, ready to act if needed. On the third night of his visit, Alonso requested to inspect the church during evening prayers. Joaquin, confident that the inspection had revealed nothing, agreed without hesitation. As they walked through the nave of the church, Alonso's eyes caught a small side door. "Where does this lead?" he asked casually. "Only to a storage room," Joaquin replied smoothly. "Nothing of interest." "I would like to see it," Alonso said. Joaquin hesitated, the first sign of unease. Of course, though it was quite disordered. "Perhaps tomorrow, in better light." "Now, Father Vázquez," Alonso said firmly, his tone carrying the authority of the viceroy himself. Visibly tense, Joaquin opened the door, revealing a small room filled with boxes and barrels. Alonso entered, scanning the space with the precision of an investigator. He tapped the walls, listening carefully, until one section produced a different sound. "What lies behind this wall?" Alonso asked. "Nothing," Joaquin said too quickly. "That's the end of the building." Alonso took out a small sketch he had drawn based on the exterior structure. "According to my measurements, there should be at least 20 more feet of construction in this direction," he said calmly. Joaquin's face hardened. "Perhaps your map is mistaken, Father. Or perhaps you are lying," Alonso replied quietly. The two men stared at each other, the silence thick with tension. Finally, Alonso spoke again. "Father Vázquez, I carry the Viceroy's authority to inspect every inch of this mission. If there is something behind this wall, I will find it, with or without your cooperation." Then came a faint sound from the other side, a moan, unmistakably human. Alonso turned to Joaquin, whose expression had gone cold and lifeless. "Explain that," the Dominican demanded. "There is nothing to explain," Joaquin said flatly, his mask of humility now gone. "You've come farther than any other meddler, even farther than that doctor. But it doesn't matter what you discover. My work is protected at the highest levels." "Your work?" Alonso said, his voice heavy with controlled rage. "You mean torture and enslavement of innocents?" "Salvation," Joaquin cried, his voice filled with manic fervor. "I offer them salvation. These pagan souls are damned unless they are purified. My methods are a divine gift." "Your methods are an abomination," Alonso declared. "And they end now." With a sudden movement, Joaquin drew a dagger from beneath his cassock and lunged at him. But Alonso, despite his age, had anticipated it. He stepped aside. Joaquin crashed into the wall. Before he could recover, Alonso blew a whistle that hung around his neck. Within moments, armed soldiers stormed into the church. Francisco Vázquez, who had been watching from afar, tried to flee but was quickly captured. "Tear down this wall," Alonso ordered. The soldiers swung picks and hammers, breaking through the stone until a dark passage was revealed. What lay beyond would haunt every man who saw it. A network of underground chambers turned into a nightmare laboratory. In the first room, tables stained with blood, surgical instruments, shelves lined with jars labeled with herbs and unknown substances. In the second, iron cages, each holding indigenous captives in varying states of catatonia, their bodies covered in burns, scars, and surgical sutures across their scalps. Every one of them bore the same cross-shaped mark on the forearm. But the final chamber was the worst. A circular room where Christian symbols had been blasphemously fused with ancient pagan signs. And at its center, strapped to a cruciform table, lay Diego Martinez, alive but unrecognizable. His head was partially shaved, showing multiple surgical incisions. His once bright, intelligent eyes were now vacant, staring into nothing. His lips moved endlessly, murmuring Latin prayers intertwined with incoherent fragments. On a nearby table rested Joaquin's infamous book, a thick volume bound in what appeared to be human skin. Inside were pages filled with a grotesque mixture of theological writings, European medical knowledge, and ancient Aztec and Mayan rituals. A manual of perfect torment, disguised as a religious treatise. The discovery beneath Santa Maria de Los Angeles shook San Luis Potosí, and soon, all New Spain. The subterranean chambers, the instruments, the captives, the book. It was a scandal the church could neither conceal nor easily explain. Within days, Father Joaquin, Francisco, and the few surviving guards of the mission were arrested and taken to the tribunal of the Holy Office in Mexico City. Antonio Vázquez, paralyzed and delirious, was left under house arrest in San Luis, where he would die a few months later, his last words a confused prayer to a God that had long abandoned him. The trial of the Vázquez brothers became one of the most secretive proceedings in colonial history. The church tried to minimize the damage, officially calling it a case of excessive zeal and experimental fanaticism, rather than open heresy. But even among the inquisitors, the evidence found at the mission provoked horror and disbelief. Witnesses spoke of the human experiments, the forced conversions, and the mysterious chants that blended Latin liturgy with ancient Nahuatl invocations. Dozens of skeletons exhumed from the Olive Grove cemetery confirmed the scale of the atrocities. Skulls with trepanation holes, bones showing deliberate fractures, signs of vivisection. Clear proof of unspeakable acts committed under the banner of faith. When questioned, Father Joaquin Vázquez showed no remorse. He defended himself with terrifying calm, quoting scripture and fragments of his own writings. Pain purifies, he told the inquisitors. The body is merely the clay vessel of the soul. To shape it, one must first break it. He claimed that his work was divinely inspired, that he had been guided by voices of angels that showed him how to transform human nature itself. But as his madness deepened, those angels began to reveal their true nature. And even the inquisitors, hardened by years of trials, avoided looking into his eyes for too long. Francisco, on the other hand, broke quickly under interrogation. He confessed everything: the slave trade, the forged documents, and the bribes to local officials. He begged for mercy, claiming he had only followed his brother's orders. But his words couldn't erase the hundreds of lives destroyed for their profit. On April 3, 1657, both men were sentenced by the Holy Office. Father Joaquin Vázquez was declared guilty of heresy, witchcraft, blasphemy, and crimes against humanity. Francisco Vázquez was found guilty of trafficking in human lives and collaboration with heretical practices. They were executed publicly in the main plaza of Mexico City before a crowd of thousands. Francisco died screaming, begging for forgiveness. Joaquin remained silent until the flames reached his face. And then, in his final breath, he whispered something that none could understand. A phrase in a strange mixture of Latin and Nahuatl, believed to be the same incantation he had used during his rituals. The church ordered all his writings burned, including the Book of Conversion. But rumors spread that Father Alonso de Castilla secretly kept a copy of it as evidence for the Vatican. That copy, according to legend, disappeared during the journey to Rome. and has never been found. The mission of Santa Maria de Los Angeles was abandoned, sealed with lime and holy water. The surrounding lands are declared cursed. Locals avoided them for generations, saying that on certain nights, the bells still rang on their own, echoing through the empty valley, and that if one listened closely, they could hear voices praying in Latin and crying in Nahuatl beneath the earth. A century later, explorers who reopened the ruins reported finding chains, broken crucifixes, and a faint but persistent odor of burnt herbs. No one dared spend the night there. As for Dr. Diego Martinez, his mind never fully returned. He was taken to a monastery, where he lived out his days in silence. His only words, repeated endlessly in a whisper. The bells, they open the mind, but not all doors should ever be opened. He died in 1664, and his body was buried far from San Luis. Without a name, without a stone, the land where the mission once stood was later reclaimed by the forest. Today, only a few broken arches and eroded walls remain, half buried under vines and dust. But the locals still call it El Valle de los Almas Rotos, the Valley of Broken Souls, because they say, some nights, when the wind blows through the olive trees, you can still hear the faint echo of a man's voice, reciting a prayer that never ends.